fragile sun, destined to break. I search the sacred text while trapped in a pew. All I discovered left me confused. I found no answers, only disputes. I see no love in these people's truth. We bless the sun 'cause it gave light to our days. We cursed our youth 'cause it wouldn't stay. We swore in blood that our hope would remain. Such fragile sun, destined to break. We bless the sun 'cause it gave light to our days. We cursed our youth 'cause it wouldn't stay. We swore in blood that our hope would remain. Such fragile sun, destined to break. I spent my youth dropping coins in a wishing well. In hopes one day that I would find a story to tell. How every regret's of soulless empty life. And it's a burden that keeps me awake at night. We bless the sun 'cause it gave light to our days. We
Okay, thank you. I will call this regularly scheduled virtual meeting of Bridgewater Town Council to order. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, we will declare the agenda as approved. And are there any announcements from any members of council? Not that there's a lot going on. Anything? Okay. Going down to proclamations. So Volunteer Week is April 19th to 25th. And traditionally in our community, of course, we would have a volunteer recognition event and celebrate the hundreds, literally hundreds of volunteers in our community. Obviously, that can't take place during this pandemic, and so that event will hopefully be rescheduled to the fall. And more information will come out when we're through this pandemic and those dates are set. But it's still important to recognize our volunteers, and so that proclamation will be posted online. Going down, obviously we have no delegations because we have no in-person delegations until further notice, but later on the agenda we do have a committee member. So in a couple of minutes, we'll welcome Mr. John Swain as a representative from the the Council Remuneration Committee. That was a group of citizens, and he'll bring his report. So what I'll ask is Council's indulgence that we go right down to reports and recommendations to deal with that first item. And then when Mr. Swain is done, we'll start to go from top to bottom, but keeping in mind that at 6:30, we do have the budget. It is a timed item, so we will stop whatever we're doing at 6:30 and move to that. Are there any questions?
No.
All right. And John, I'm assuming you're here?
Yes, I am, Your Honor.
All right. So I will turn it over to Mr. Swain.
Okay. So, folks, has everybody had chance to review the request for council decision report memo?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I think what I'll do is, rather than get into the nitty-gritty of that, I'll basically give an overall summary of the way in which our committee collaborated, the philosophy we used to sort of come up with the recommendations that we did, and then open up the table to questions, because I did put a lot of nitty-gritty in the request for council remuneration. Does that sound like a plan?
It does.
That's great, John.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. So as I was reviewing my notes tonight and taking a review of the report that we submitted, I realized that we kind of took a similar approach that I know real estate appraisers use, which, looks something like this. What are the specific qualities about a piece of real estate? What are the specific qualities that, such as a roof, is it up to date? The bathrooms and kitchen up to date, the age. Now let's go look at the comparable properties and what they've sold for recently, and let's make sure for comparable properties we're taking into account the region. So, for example, a comparable house in Vancouver will sell for 10 times the amount than Bridgewater. So we kind of took this approach with the town council remuneration. We talked about all the good qualities that we're seeing in the current council, but infinitely more important than the qualities were the results. So you don't need to be an expert to see how our town has improved under the watch of the current council, including infrastructure and curb appeal and the general rounding out of our town as a great place to bring up a family or retire. And with many of the amenities that a vibrant town needs to attract those specific demographics. So our current council has spoiled us, frankly. And we wanted to ensure that the momentum of the current council continues with future councils. So at that point, then we got nitty-gritty into the numbers and compared remuneration of councils throughout Nova Scotia. But to do this, we wanted to get the remuneration down to a comparable unit so that we're talking about apples and apples here. So as a committee, we unanimously agreed that the responsibility of any town council is to its citizens, not just the voter base, but every soul that resides in that town. And this made us see that our council is considerably underpaid compared to most other towns on a per capita basis. So then, we subjectively discussed our perceptions of the different infrastructure differences amongst other towns. And of course, we're not civil engineers. It mostly consisted of, how many streets does Wolfville has, how many stoplights does Kentville have? And, but after doing this nitty gritty, we had a range to look at. And this range, basically matched up with the qualitative points that we came up with. And so, we recommended on the higher end of this range because Well, why not, right? I mean, the town it's in decent shape financially, or at least it was when we started collaborating. I mean, I have, like a lot of things, I have no idea what this COVID-19 is going to do to business and municipal units and such, but let's just assume that we're still in good financial position. And, here's the thing, guys. When thinking about value, sometimes we get so hung up on the activities being the driver of value as opposed to the results, right? Good leaders understand that working hard is much less important than working smart and delivering. So right now, our town is on the world stage. And once we get back to, or, adjusted to a new normal, there's a lot of work to do, and hopefully a boom to be managed by a talented and fairly compensated council of smokingly awesome professionals. So I open up the floor to questions, or the screen to questions, and I'll do my best to answer.
Questions from members of council?
John, Bill McGinnis here. The
Bill.
towns in particular that you took into consideration,
Yes.
there are towns of similar size, and they were who? There are Amherst and Truro and a few like that.
Okay, Bill, let me first of all, I'll show you the towns that we used. It was the only data that we had available. Amherst, Kanish, Bridgewater, New Glasgow, Truro, Wolfville, Yarmouth, Kentville. Okay. Now, the population range is, of course, after we as a committee agreed that the driver of responsibility for any town council is the people that reside there. We had a real range of different populations amongst those towns. So when we talk about size, the size that we were using population size, right? And so that's kind of why we decided to take it down to a per capita basis, so that we're comparing apples and apples here, right? To compare, for example, let's look at Wolfville. Is arguably a very, very small region. The mayors are paid $29,000. Deputy mayors $19,000. I had nothing on council remuneration, but when I compared those rates, it's almost $7 per person, right? And so then when we took into account, the fact that these towns, I mean, I don't think it takes a civil engineer to look at Wolfville and compare it to a town like Bridgewater and say, we've got a lot more moving parts. But I'm just a silly old accountant. I don't know. Maybe that town has got a whole underground sewer system that I don't know about. But and so doing that's kind of how we came up with the nitty gritty of the ranges, the per capita, of which we can then apply to the population size of Bridgewater, right? And that's kind of the way we tackled it.
John, can I ask a question, John? Andrew here.
Yep. Hey, Andrew.
In any of the towns you surveyed, and you've got the chart there that gives the remuneration for everybody based on population and so on. Did any of them give an indication that they are also looking at this?
Well, we knew that Kentville, and Tammy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Kentville has had a recent review.
Okay.
I think it's as early as 2018 is the last time they did a review, right? And that was a real bit of a highlight. Like, we really did look at Kentville because, although it has 2,000 less residents, roughly, we kind of, again, thought about the town and thought about the remuneration that the council and deputy mayor and mayor and councils were receiving, right? And we thought, we even think Bridgewater has more moving parts than Kentville. So to us, thinking about the comparability of that remuneration, and then thinking about all of the things that a town council working for Bridgewater, especially with the future of Bridgewater, right? We've got a lot of challenges coming up that we want, we thought should be managed by the right leadership team, right? And unless I'm wrong, again, we're citizens, we're not civil engineers, and certainly not political scientist or anything like that, but we subjectively kind of came to the determination that, you know, Bridgewater probably deserves to be at least comparable to Kentville, if not on the higher range. So does that make sense, or is that helpful?
Yep.
So Michael here, just thinking of the remuneration per capita, I certainly get that, but it's a huge increase. It's you know, this is it's not a rich town, and it's not that the mayor and deputy mayor and councils aren't worth it. I think we are, but it is a very huge increase in a time when the future is, we're not quite sure what the future is going to hold. Certainly the short-term future. And I'm just wondering if maybe it shouldn't be done in phases. You know, maybe half this particular upcoming council, and then the next council can kick it down the street. And you know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of money. And
so Michael, first of all, thank you. That's a great observation. I took a bit of a different stance on the financial position of Bridgewater. I actually looked at the financial statements, and unfortunately you got a CPA in the committee, so I did look at the financial position, and I thought that pre-COVID-19, again, you have to go, you know, a lot of this deliberation happened in the latter part of January, early part of February. I'm not sure. I don't know what some of the deliberations would have looked like right now. Probably everybody is so uncertain about everything, right, that I don't know. I have no idea. But using the data, and at the time, the thought was we're in a decent financial position, but we had to look at the results, right? Yes, you can phase it in, and of course, that's possibly more palatable. But when I'm looking at the immediate, or even the medium term, short term, if we weren't in COVID, the short to medium term is there's a lot of challenges coming up for our town to sort of maintain the momentum that's been started. And hopefully, hopefully folks agree with me that there is a momentum. There's been a change, at least me as a citizen has noticed, and from all of my peer group, and just the general vibe that I get as a longtime resident of Bridgewater. There is some contrast here. I want to continue to attract a vibrant team of leadership here, right? And so that is entirely, this is why we, in the body of the report, Michael, we gave the range. It is entirely up to you as a council. I personally am strongly suggesting to go on the higher end, but I don't have to take the phone calls that you guys might have to take from citizens. Certainly, if anybody calls you and doubts the talent of your committee, tell them to call John Swain. I'll talk their ear off. I'll change your minds.
If you could send us your phone number, John, that would be great.
Find me there.
John, Bill McGinnis here.
Go ahead, Bill.
There's another factor in play here, I think, as well.
Yep.
I think, if my memory serves me correctly, the last increase that Bridgewater Council received was 2012.
Yeah.
And so there's also a catch-up factor.
Absolutely.
And that, in retrospect, that might have been a mistake. We did those things for the right reason, but I tend to agree with you as someone, and I hope there's not a public announcement, who is not going to be offering this next election. I can see where the town has changed, and you know, you need some what I call top-end talent at that table, because as you indicated, and as it's been publicized, we're on the world stage, and that's no small matter, and we want to stay there. And as I keep telling Mayor Mitchell, we've been punching above our weight now for quite a while, and I want to continue to do that. So I think your analysis is, for me anyway, is close to being very, very, very much right on where I think it should be.
If I can make another comment too, because you know, there is a lot of uncertainty around COVID-19. But like I've been telling clients of mine, and frankly, any small business owner that wants to talk to me for the past 3 weeks, since the crisis, officially began, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that comes from out of crisis. But out of opportunity, you need to have a sharp group of leadership, a sharp group of people that can spot and find those opportunities, right? And there's opportunities and challenges, right? And I think that a good, knowledgeable and experienced group of people will be able to take on not only the challenges of being on the world stage, on the boom that I hope that Bridgewater still continues to enjoy, but also like how are we going to recover as a community, and what kind of bright individuals do we want leading our town to be helping us recover from this. All right. So
I think it's probably a good time. Maybe we should have done this at the beginning. So for the members of the public that are watching, the recommendations from this committee. So this happens within 6 months of the next election, but it is not this. The results of this will not be for this council. I want the public to be aware so that they don't think we are making a decision for ourselves now. The decision that is made by this council will not take effect until the next council is sworn in. So I think that's important for the public. We're not making a decision for ourselves today. So I just want to note that, John, because you did mention that Kentville went through a review in 2018. So unless their decision 2 years ago was for this fall, then they would have been making a decision for themselves at the time. So that's not the case.
And I quite get the optics of this without somebody realizing what you just said, Your Honor. This is an independent group of 3 individuals, myself, Palma, I think it's Shampoo. I don't know. Sorry, Palma, if you're watching, I apologize. And Corey Rogers, and all definitely great committee, fellow committee members. We tried to be as objective as we could, and certainly this isn't something that I think that in the midst of all this awful thing that the committee, the town council is going to give themselves a raise. This is a very future thinking. Like, we're not just thinking of the current council either here, guys. Right? We're thinking about who we want to attract in the future. Right? And I think you're all great people. I know every one of you. But I hope to get similar types of leadership in the future, because I'm definitely in it for the long haul, and I hope that so are my children. So, we want to set an example, and create a town council that people want to be engaged in. So,
any other questions?
Stephen?
Yes. Sorry, I think I heard Wayne. Wayne, did I hear you first?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, we used to get a third deduction from our salaries tax-wise, and this year we got hit with the tax, and we did kind of cover some of that, but we're on a wide range of pay scales. And I see that as a fair settlement, where we'll be paying income tax on that in full amount, not just 2/3 of it. So.
Yeah, actually, Wayne, that's a great point. And isn't it amazing, as an accountant, I failed to bring up the actual tax piece of all this. But that's also a testament to, like, we were quite serious about looking for results versus, like letting sort of tax wag the dog, kind of, or the tax be the tail that's wagging the dog. Like, we're really hoping that voters basically hold that level of salary, hold the people that occupy those roles accountable, and then we get sort of a similar, if not even. We track even better leadership in the future, although I'm not sure how that's possible.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne.
Okay, Tammy, did I hear you?
Cheryl Fajir.
Sorry, Cheryl. Yes, Cheryl.
Yes. Thank you, John, and your your committee for doing the review. Not an easy task for sure. I just had a question about the increase, the recommendation for the increase of the annual CPI for 2.5%.
Yeah.
And just curious as to why that recommendation was there versus maybe to put a recommendation as to when the review should happen again, for example.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, that seemed like a generally accepted or a standard sort of clause in some of the other jurisdictions we looked at, that they had a CPI, automatic CPI increase. And I mean, frankly, I come from industry and I just couldn't imagine not having an automatic CPI increase, right? If you don't put that in there, you know, and salaries don't get reviewed again for 3-4 years, you're losing, you know, you're actually losing value in your salaries. So this ensures that we keep up with the, you know, with inflation and the current pace of the value of a dollar today versus tomorrow. Does that answer your question?
I think so. It's I guess back to Councillor McGuinness' comment earlier of the last review was quite some time ago. I believe it said 2012, and so we are playing a little bit of catch up, and with having the CPI, that maybe show the good intention of you know, not being in this predicament again for doing the committee's difficult task. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Cheryl, you hit the nail on the head. Like a correction like this, you know, we don't want to be doing this every 3 years, right? Because it's just not, it's not easy on anyway. Stability is the key here. So if we have a CPI index in there, you're, you know, once in a while you can review and maybe do some bumps here and there. I think that's cool.
Other questions?
Just one more quick one. Andrew here, John. Did you guys look at tax rates at all? I know you mentioned per capita a fair amount. Like, you know, I find Bridgewater more compares to Truro, at least personally, just with, you know, what's happening in the towns and how busy it is commercially and so on and so forth. And town of Truro certainly has a substantially higher tax rate, both for residential and for commercial. And did that come into play with your decision making at all, given that maybe they've got more money to play with than we might?
No.
Does that make sense? No? Okay.
No, we did not look at any of the financial positions of the other towns, but we did look at ours. And I mean, again, it was a consensus of the committee that we felt like a raise of this level, it could easily be supported by your current financial position, unless the only caveat I'd make is I don't know what your budgeting discussion tonight is going to entail in regards to COVID. I don't, right? So you almost kind of have, I don't know how you guys work this, but you almost have to maybe have that discussion first. Because if you're going to, I don't know, give everybody a 6-month break on property taxes, that's just a joke. But you can leave that out of the minutes, everybody.
Yeah.
Subliminal messaging right there.
But that's certainly going to blow all this out of the, out of the water. So I'm sure that's not the plan. I would not recommend that be the plan. So, but you didn't hire me for that.
Any other questions for?
Can I ask a question of Tammy?
Yes.
Yeah. This is Jennifer.
Hey, Jennifer.
Thank you very much for your work. You know, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule, the three of you, to do this. And I think you're right. I think our mayor has really set a bar and set an example for the community, for himself and future mayors, and for the rest of council as well. For Tammy, we've been trying, with all the uncertainty and through our budget process, we've been trying to give ourselves as much flexibility as possible, just because we don't know what's to come in the next few months or however long this may be. If we were looking at increases, but we didn't want to commit ourselves to anything at this point, can it be managed like we've done with some of the other items, where we're kind of coming back to it at a later date to see if we're still in a position to go forward with what we've put in our budget?
We don't set our tax rate. The latest we have to set it is, I think, the middle of August in order to get ready for our final tax billing. You can make adjustments after the budget's approved. What's in the budget right now is, we kind of got out our crystal ball trying to figure out where council may go with the recommendation is the median. The annual impact is minimal between medium and the high range that's proposed here, the higher end of that. So I wouldn't let that be a deterrent in terms of going with the recommendation. If you decide, we have to do policy amendments, bring it back to council, so it probably won't be until probably June. So you might have a little bit of a better picture. You can always defer it until July and do the policy amendment at that time. I think the key would be is to create the budget with it in there that you could retract if you needed to.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. That's good advice.
If I can just add into that too, because it's a great question, Jennifer. Tammy and I had this conversation today too. There's a lot of uncertainty with where we are now, not Bridgewater, but just as a world, I would say. So every community across Nova Scotia is in the middle of preparing their budgets right now. Some have passed them as recently as last week, and some have delayed them. But the reality is that we don't know tomorrow any more than we're going to know 3 weeks from now. But to Tammy's point, the question I asked this afternoon was, let's say we get to the beginning of August and nothing has got better. Do we have the mechanism in place to say, okay, the budget we passed is now no good, essentially? And so, as she said, yes, until the middle of August, we can make changes as we need. So the budget that we're anticipating to pass in 2 weeks, let's say, is not set in stone. It is a bit of a crystal ball, just like we did with the capital budget when we said, listen, here's the capital budget. We seem to think what's in there is good, but make sure you come back to us before you go and buy like a front end loader, because maybe we can't afford that because we've had, a lot of trouble or a lot of businesses that needed support. And so we just didn't have the money. So regardless of what we do today and regardless of what we do in 2 weeks, even when we pass the budget, it is not something that we can't later review and say, we cannot do what we wanted to do.
Good to know. Thank you.
And I'll just add that I find this very uncomfortable. And I know all of you do as well, which is a good thing. What you don't want are people who are a little too excited to deal with council remuneration, even though we know that this is for the next council. So I do want to just say I appreciate how everyone is maybe a little bit antsy discussing this. So I think it speaks to character. Are there any other questions for John while he's here? Okay, hearing none. There are a bunch of options in terms of motions in there. Is someone prepared to make a motion? And Tammy, just to clarify, so whatever motion we make today, it's essentially saying that we're coming back to make policy adjustments.
That's right. You would give, if you're comfortable with the recommendation as is, or you want to propose an alternate number, you can do that and give direction to staff to prepare the policy amendments. And notice that you'll consider them at the next council meeting or a future council meeting. So it's not final today because it is a policy change. You have to give notice.
Okay. Somebody prepared to make a motion?
Just a quick question. The motion reads April 27th as the review date, I guess. Yeah. I guess with related to where we are with the world situation and so on, can that be pushed further into a May meeting?
Yeah, you can. Okay. You can have it brought back to we would just have to kind of specify what meeting you're going to give consideration to.
There's no significance to Apral 27th. It's just
the the next council meeting.
Yeah, okay.
You could pick May. You could pick June.
So I guess does it really need to be tied to when we anticipate the budget coming back to council for potential approval? So that might be the dates. That's maybe why the dates are tied, Andrew.
but it doesn't have to be tied to that date. If you if you prove it in a number in the budget, it can be changed as long as you go with the higher end. So you could pick May 11th or May 25th, or you could pick June as well, June 8th or June 22nd. This policy wouldn't take effect. The changes wouldn't take effect until the new council was sworn in. So.
Right. Okay.
What's council's wish?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'd move that town council for the town of Bridgewater accept the recommendation of the remuneration committee as provided in document 20-075 and direct staff to revise policy 64 reflecting the proposed amendments, and further to give notice pursuant to section 48 of the Municipal Government Act at the April 27th. Oh, sorry, what date we were going with? May 11th?
May 11th, or if you'd rather wait till June, you can do June as well.
Okay, what's our first council meeting in June?
The 8th.
Okay, the June 8th, 2020 council meeting. Amendments to policy 64, council remuneration, will be considered to enable the changes in the compensation package effective upon the swearing in of the next council.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Bill. Further discussion?
Question.
Okay, we're gonna do it the way we have. So we're gonna go around the room. So Bill, yay or nay?
Yay.
Councillor Vergier,
Yay.
Councillor Thorburn,
Yay.
Councillor McDonald,
Yay.
Councillor Graves,
Yay.
Deputy Mayor Tanner,
Yay.
and I will be yay. So that will be brought back for the first meeting in June. Thank you. And John, if you can thank the members of your committee for your hard work. I know it's probably also not a fun thing to do. There might be people that have questions, but we appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
you.
Okay, so yeah, thank you everyone for your input. We're going to go to budget because it is 6:30, so we do have a timed item. And I'm going to just apologize. My head is probably going back and forth, back and forth. I've set up, I'm trying to be as efficient as possible. So I have one computer with all the motions, another computer with the camera, and then of course budget in front. So for the public, we are dealing with the operating budget. And so Tammy, do you want to, are you leading the charge on this one? Okay, thank you. It's all yours.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen, so have some patience. Okay. Is that working for everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the 2020-21 operating and capital budget. At our last meeting, we considered the capital budget. It was, I think, our second meeting looking at that. So tonight you have some of the capital items incorporated into our operating budget in terms of what we're funding from operations, and we also made some changes to the capital budget as you directed. This is what I would like to refer to as the pre-pandemic budget. It has not been determined yet what form of municipal program there may or may not be. We have been working with NSFM, who's working with the province, to look at some options here for municipalities. So we haven't made any decisions with respect to that, nor do we know fully what the implications for this fiscal year will be as a result of the pandemic. So the budget is what council had directed prior to the pandemic, and it's based on the strategic priorities that were developed prior to that as well. Just as with the capital budget, when this budget is approved, we will be monitoring and reevaluating our financial position, and consequently adjustments to this budget may be required as we proceed through the fiscal year. And as mentioned, while we're proposing a tax rate here, council does have until mid-August to set the tax rate, which will give us time for our final billing.
Can I just get everyone who's not talking, just remember to mute your microphones when we're not speaking? Thank you.
Okay, so the operating budget is $21.35 million, and that is a 5.3% increase from prior year when you're looking at the expenditure side of things. With this budget, we are proposing to keep tax rates the same as last year, so there would be no increase to the commercial or residential tax rate. So residential would remain at $1.65 per $100 of assessment, and commercial would be $3.97 per $100 of commercial assessment. The wastewater rate is proposed to increase by 15% for the first unit only, which is in keeping with Council's direction from prior fiscal years. And much of that increase will go to our wastewater reserve. And if Council remembers, we have a significant capital requirement in our wastewater area or infrastructure over the next 10 to 20 years. So the rate would be $404.05 annually for residential and $858.20 for commercial. And Council's strategic priorities are accommodated within this budget. And we met in January to discuss and develop those. This budget aligns with the Economic Action Plan, and this is year 3 of 3 for that. And Council's strategic priorities that you've developed have also aligned with your Economic Action Plan. Some of the key things that will be achieved in this budget, in keeping with the Economic Action Plan, is seeing King Street as a vibrant, thriving place. So some of the initiatives within our budget is a facade program. There's $35,000 within that for grants for facade improvements. North Parkade improvements are proposed in our capital budget. Support for special events along King Street and within the downtown area. And the budget also proposes an economic development position which would focus on retention, expansion, and new growth within our business sector. In terms of community prosperity, we continue with the Energized Bridgewater, otherwise known to some as Smart Cities, and there's $926,000 devoted to that in the budget this year, and I would remind Council that that is fully funded through our grant. There's capital investment in infrastructure, so there's a $5.8 million capital budget and a $2.4 million price tag in terms of capital projects being carried forward from last year into this year. And we're looking at a land sales marketing strategy that will position the town for selling land throughout the town and within our industrial park as well. In terms of achieving high levels of community well-being, we continue to invest in public transit, which Council last year made a permanent service. This year we'll see bus acquisitions. We have a tender out right now, and we should be making a recommendation for award shortly. And there's $600,000 in our budget for that, and we've received some grants to help offset some of those costs. And we have a proposal in the budget, in the capital budget, that would look at some modifications to the arena to allow for a storage bay area for our buses. We continue to support community events within Bridgewater as well. And you think of Christmas on the Way, and the arts festivals that we have, Canada Day, fund monies are in there as well for that. Reducing energy poverty is a goal of councils, and we're doing that through our smart cities and the implementation of our community energy investment plan. And again, there's close to $1 million there for that. Pro Kids, we have $11,000 within the budget that is dedicated towards the Pro Kids program. Grants to nonprofit organizations, this is normally $29,000. We've put $49,000 in the budget, and that includes consideration for the tennis club grant request. We continue to provide recreational facilities, parks and trails through this budget. And there's continued investment in emergency response services, so our police budget, which represents approximately 22% of our budget, is continued to be supported to provide service within our community. The net cost is $3.7 million. Fire services provided at $1.4 million, and regional emergency management organization at $24,000. We will see the development of an open space strategy this year that will look at how our parks and our open spaces are where they are, what we may need, where the gaps are, and how we develop them. And our active transportation plan is soon to be revised and brought back to council for consideration. And as I mentioned, we're maintaining the tax rate, but these tax rates are not only last year's. The residential rate hasn't changed since 2012-13, and the commercial rate decreased in 2012-13 and remained there until 27-18 when it was reduced again, and it's remained at that reduced level and continues to this year again. And this year we'll see the development of an accessibility plan in cooperation with our partners. And this will be a 10-year plan that will enable us to meet the regulations that the province has put out with respect to accessibility. Continuing with community well-being, we have continued funding for the Lunenburg County Lifestyle Center. So we provide a grant for operating and capital. And this year we will see our contribution at $384,000, which is a decrease from last year. And there will be a $375,000 contribution towards capital to do some mechanical modifications that will see a significant reduction in power consumption and thus energy cost. The museum, there will be a grant. There's a grant of $75,000 for the Des Brisay Museum to see its operations continue. In terms of fiscal responsibility, we increased the funding of capital from operating to $1.17 million. And we're looking at a debt management strategy that will outline when we borrow, under what terms we borrow, and how much we borrow. Reserve policy, so what should be our reserves, what's a healthy rate for the town. We're looking at a sewer rate transition plan to transition the sewer rate to a cost recovery, full cost recovery model. And we're looking at a grant coordinator position within this budget that would pay for itself and more in terms of sourcing grants to help offset the cost of some of our programs. In terms of organizational excellence, the town's technology plan continues to be implemented in this budget, and we'll be looking at the development of an app, and that there's a small amount in the budget to have that done, and that'll be a Bridgewater app that will push information to individuals who utilize that app. Records management, we've been moving towards records management over the last year, and this year we'll see $48,000 in the budget to see that implemented more throughout the organization. Time and attendance module implementation, this was a recommendation from our internal control audit to look at ways to automate our time and attendance and thus reduce the amount of staff time as well as the human error that could go into our present process. So there's $9,000 in the budget for that. And we'll be looking, we've been testing the procurement module. This year the goal is to implement the procurement module throughout the organization as well, which will automate some of our procurement processes. So your operating budget summary, as you can see, we have a 5.3% increase in gross expenditures over last year, so that's just over $1 million. Non-tax revenue, it has increased as well. So that's increased 12.2% over last year, or $232,000, and a lot of that is within the police services area. Transfer from reserves, there's $280,000 more that is being collected and put into reserve, or coming from reserve, sorry. And we've got tax revenue at 3.1% increase. So in terms of what we're collecting from the taxpayer to support the 5.3% increase in budget, there's an increase in just a little over $500,000 in tax revenue. So where do your tax dollars go? So this just gives you, it's just a visual to give you an idea about where we spend our portions of the tax dollar, and you can see that police services is the larger piece of the pie there at 22%. Engineering is next, so engineering would include public works, and that's 12.4%. Mandatory contributions, which include education, assessment services, the library board, correctional centers, and senior citizens housing is 12%. Wastewater is at 8.27%. Parks and recreations at 6.61%. Fire at 6.9%, and it continues down from there. But it just gives you an idea of where we're spending the tax dollars. In terms of mandatory contributions, as I mentioned, this is 12% of your expenditures, and as you can see, education is the largest contributor there at just over 2 million.
Tammy, will you take questions as you go, or do you want them at the end?
Might as well take them as we go.
I just had a thought last night with regard to education. I'm wondering if it's worthwhile approaching the Department of Education asking for a reduced contribution amount, given that schools have been and probably will be closed at least until September. There must be some cost savings that the department is experiencing as a result, and shouldn't that obviously affect our contribution?
Yeah. I think it's a point worth raising to NSFM, who could then take that forward to the province. See, I suspect there's still some fixed costs they have, but the buses aren't running, those types of things aren't happening. So, yeah, I think it's worth raising the question about our contributions, and will we see an adjustment?
Well, this might go with the conversation that NSFM is having in terms of strategies for municipalities, one of which I believe is the deferment of mandatory contributions. So to Deputy Mayor Tanner's point, taking that deferment of mandatory contributions and perhaps adjusting it to a deferment and or reduction, because deferment just kicks it down the road a little bit longer. We just have to pay it again. But I think it's, yeah, definitely worth asking. We can I can raise that with Mayor Mood, who of course is the president of the NSFM on council's behalf.
Okay.
Okay. All right. This here just shows you where our revenue comes from, and you can see that 83% comes from taxes, and then we have grants in lieu at 4%, sales of service at 3%, and a number at 2%, like transfers from reserves and so on. So it's just a breakdown of where the money comes from to fund the budget. So the budget this year, the format is a little different. We have added some columns, you probably noted. So we have added the column called adjusted baseline, additions, deletions, and then proposed budget. So your adjusted baseline is what I like to refer to as your core service delivery. It's if you did nothing new, this is what you would do. So maintaining current service levels. So to get to the adjusted baseline, we took last year's budget and removed those one-time projects, adjusted it based on actuals, and added in incremental increases such as CPI adjustments to salaries and those types of things, or if insurance premiums were going up or power, that type of thing, those would all be reflected in your adjusted baseline. Additions are what's new. So what's being proposed? Some of these are mandatory, some of these are discretionary, but it's really what's new within the budget. And deletions are those things that were taken out. Normally they're things that would be like a service level reduction, or it's no longer necessary to do, so we're pulling it out. And the proposed budget, I think that's pretty self-explanatory in terms of what that is, but it's basically your adjusted baseline, add your additions, subtract your deletions, and that's your proposed budget. So that's the format that we have within the budget this year. So what I would propose that you do, I think everyone has their budget document, and we're just going to run through the tabs literally, looking at within the budget document itself. You have, it shows your baseline. So I'm just going to highlight for council at a very high level kind of what some of the changes are to the baseline, and then focus on the additions within each category to explain those to you. Does that sound good? Okay. So within the administration, the baseline adjustments are primarily for CPI. Councillor remuneration is in the baseline, and one could argue that could be an addition, but we included it within the baseline because we weren't too sure when the remuneration report was coming to council. Within that, we have included the median, as I mentioned earlier, the median range, but it's a very small impact to change it to the higher end of that. You'll see within the baseline, the REMO budget's up increased a bit, but that's based on the budget that was approved by the advisory committee and forwarded to council. So of course that's within the baseline as well. In terms of your additions, we have within here the expenses under the mayor category, and this is the MIT REAP program. So there's funding within that. I think we've had a discussion at council about that program. If we're able to realize external funding for that, then that would be offset by that, but we don't have that revenue source shown in the budget right now. And then just a general increase to reflect actuals based on travel that's required for smart cities and the Michelin Moving On conference and those things. So we don't know what this year is going to bring in terms of those types of activities. Some associations are canceling those events, so we'll see, but the funds are in the budget to do that. The smart cities, so council approved changes to the remuneration policy to provide for compensation for additional duties resulting from the smart cities. So you'll have to give that some consideration when you look at your policy changes, but that reflects kind of an estimate of what that would be in terms of extra hours required to do smart city engagements and speeches at those engagements. Sponsorships, we've increased that by 4,500 to reflect actuals that are being spent. The economic development officer position, that is proposed at 6 months, so 46,000. So you would just multiply that by 2 to get a full year, and that includes all employer cost. The grant coordinator is at 10 months at 63,000. Professional development has been increased to reflect an additional AMA membership for a position, as well as the MIT REAP for a staff representative to go as well. And we would probably choose the EDO position if that were to be created. Additional meeting pay and travel and cell phone costs to reflect those positions being created as well. And computer hardware, we're looking at there a projector for the committee room and 2 laptops for those positions we'd be creating. Records management, we have 2 figures in here, 28,000 for additional 25 Laserfiche licenses. So everyone who is to access files and store them electronically needs a license. And then there is eScribe, additional cost for eScribe as well, as our discount got removed. And then we have 10,000 for Laserfiche training. So bring someone in to train staff on how to use all the functions within Laserfiche. Accessibility, council approved this already, which was 4,100 for our share in developing the accessibility plan. Office furniture for 2 new positions. Election, 32,000, which is our anticipated cost to run the election. Grants, as I mentioned, there's 49,000 within the budget. 20,000 is an addition, which is the tennis club request. Website development, there's 5,000 for the app development. And then we have contingencies. So within here we have 40,000 for a port assessment, if you're interested in pursuing that, and 45,000, which would be for the organizational salary review and implementation of the same. And then we took out 10,000 from the regional economic development category. So we had in there 23,000 normally, and we were proposing to reduce that by 10,000 to bring it to 13,000, which would help offset some of the EDO costs a bit. Plus, we found we weren't really utilizing the funds within that as well. So the additions in administration total $341,161 and $10,000 deletion with the Regional Economic Development Fund. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay. So finance, overall, under the finance tab, expenditures are down. I believe they're down about 0.9%. And some of the decreases there, some of the significant ones, our debt charges are down by 178,000. We have the amount of capital funded from operating is actually up by 56,000, and conditional transfers are up by 37,000. In terms of your additions, what's new within the budget? You see that we have a proposal to change a part-time to a full-time position, and this is partly due to the recommendation that came from our auditors with respects to some of the internal control improvements that they're recommending, and that does require additional resources. So the proposal is to utilize or make that part-time full-time. There's a deletion of around 19,000 in vacation relief. Some of that was a position that I believe our Director of Finance, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but the purchase of vacation time won't happen, so the relief's not required. Equipment and operation maintenance, there's 12,000 in there, and that is for a time and attendance maintenance fee. So once you put the software in, it's the maintenance fee to maintain it on an annual basis, and a new postage meter of 9,000. There's 12,000 for an internal control audit continuation or fraud risk assessment. So council will have to make a determination on that, but it's a program that you asked to be initiated and continue. And fraud risk assessment was something that our auditors had suggested we might want to go to.
Can I just ask a question about the postage meter? Time flies. So did we not just buy a postage meter a couple of years ago?
It really wasn't that long ago, but it's behaving badly lately. So we'll have to assess. Of course, it's out of warranty, and we're having to call the repair people quite often.
And is there an option to lease instead of buy? And has anyone done a cost analysis to see if it makes more sense to lease them? Because if they're going to be temperamental, we can then just send it back or rent it?
We would look at all those options before we'd look at lease and purchase, and so before we would make a decision or bring a decision to council.
Okay, thank you.
We also have in here $15,000, and that would be to provide some funds for transition from the Dawn, she retires, to transition to a new director. And that's in the event that it's required. Any questions on that? Okay. So police, I believe council has seen the police budget already, police commission budget, and we had some discussions with council about additional revenue that was going to be generated and how we wanted to treat that. So the police commission considered that, and what you have is before you is the budget that the police commission approved and forwarded to council. So the net expenditures are the same as last year, pretty much, I think 0.1%. So 3.73, and last year it was 3.73 as well. This budget sees a significant increase in revenue of $310,000, and that is associated with criminal records checks contracts that we have, as well as dispatching service contracts that the police service provide. And as I said, that represents $310,000 in total. The costs associated with providing those additional services are shown in the addition. So there's $119,308 that you'll see as crime prevention dispatchers, and that's the additional resources required. So it results in a net profit of $190,000, and of that, you'll see that $30,000 in the additions is proposed as money to be put into reserve. And that's in recognition that these contracts may not last forever, and thus the revenue goes with it when the contract disappears as well. So we don't want to get too reliant on it as a source of reducing policing costs, because it will hurt when that disappears.
Could I ask a question here? Bill McGinnis.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting 30,000 in reserve, but we have 191,000
Yep.
surplus. So I'm not sure we're being generous enough with that reserve. I'm not sure what my fellow councillors feel about that, but do we know how long that contract is that we have for those?
Scott is here somewhere, right?
Yes, so the dispatch one is 5 years up front. Signed, obviously both contracts have opt-out clauses for 90 days. If they're not happy, the fees for service is just an ongoing contract, a month to month, you know, with a 30-day cancellation.
Yeah, Bill McGinnis again. That's what concerns me. That could stop at any time, and so I'm not sure. I personally like to see more of that put into a reserve. Just my view.
Okay. So when you look at the additions, what is being proposed is only 30,000 of that. And then we have some other additions, smaller amounts like 3,000 for board meeting expenses, 1,500 for professional services, 8,000 for a new firewall, 6,000 for clothing for additional employees. The labor associated with the contracts have 119,000, 10,000 for reprogramming of TMRs, 5,000 for a pole-mounted speed sign, which is proposed up by the school there, I believe, but can be moved around. And as I said, 30,000 going into reserve. So there's 179,000 of additions within the police services budget and 310,000 of new revenue.
So to Councillor McGuinness's point, you have an undesignated surplus, which goes where?
It's actually being used to bring the net cost down to 3.7. So if you put more into reserve, that's going to increase your police services budget.
Okay, thank you.
Your net cost, yeah. I believe the police commission wanted to keep the operating expenses, the net, at similar to last year, which was 3.7.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on that? We move on to.
It's Bill McGinnis. We can have a further debate on that when we vote on the budget.
Oh yes. Yep. Yep. I've got it noted.
Thank you.
Okay. So under fire, fire services is pretty much business as usual. There are a few additions, and you'll see that these are new things that replace fundraising. So there's 2,000 for 2 socials that they've always had, but it was funded through fundraising. Memorials for fallen firefighters and special occasions of 2,000, wellness of 2,500, and building maintenance. There's 500 to reallocate our electricians' time there, but I'll note that building maintenance is up in the baseline as well, about 16,000.
Can I ask, I believe the fire chief is on the call, correct?
Yeah.
Chief, can I just ask, we had a number of the memorials, especially the ladders, stolen from the cemetery, and the replacement of those, if they are replaced, who carries the cost of those? Is that reflected in the budget here?
That's not in the budget right now, Mayor Mitchell. They haven't been replaced. What we've done so far is we've gone and looked at some different types of things that we could do. We have some pricing on medallions that could be actually installed onto the headstones rather than just planted into the ground. As far as who the cost goes to, that was a debate with the insurance company. Each, as it was stated to me a year ago, each plot owner, it would be their cost to have it replaced under their insurance claim, which we have said those do not belong to them. They belong to the fire department. They were placed there by the fire department. All those ladders belong to the fire department and were given to them, not purchased by the deceased member. So that's an argument that we have to have with the insurance company at the end of the day, I guess. They have not been replaced as of yet. And I know that we're looking at close to $6,000 to $8,000 to get them all replaced if we ever do it.
So if you replace those with the medallions instead, I'm assuming the medallions have a lower cost than the ladders. If that's the case, should those medallions not be reflected in somewhere on your budget here?
Well, at the end of the day, they probably should, but because we don't know exactly where the insurance is going with it yet, and that's a debate that I guess Kevin and I will end up having within the next couple of weeks to try to figure that out. But there is going to be a significant decrease in how much it will cost to actually do that. I do know that a local company in Lunenburg actually can make the medallions for us. And what we are planning on doing if we go this route is we would epoxy those medallions right onto the headstone so that they can't get them off and take off with them.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions in fire before we go to engineering? All right. Okay, so engineering, and here we have basically the baseline is primarily just adjustments, small adjustments made for CPI or to reflect actuals. We do there's a few accounts that have been adjusted for reallocation of our electrician's salary based on where he's spending his time. Under additions, you'll see that under town hall operations, maintenance, we have $17,500 that's being proposed, and this would be to look at some fourth floor renovations up here of $5,000. Carpet on the stairs, so replace some of the carpet that's ripped and thinning. A file room shelving on the second floor, which would provide some storage there for files, and then the lead sampling program that we're undertaking. We have some funds in there for that. Town hall, should say, energy management program, $17,200. So essentially our baseline has this funded up till October, and that's a contract that council has with Efficiency Nova Scotia, I believe. And at that point, there was to be an evaluation of the program to determine whether or not you wanted to continue with that or not. So you're not required to, but we haven't done the evaluation. If you decide to continue with it, it's $17,200, the share of it, and that would represent from October to April. So we show it as an addition because it's not part of our baseline, it's not part of our core, and you'll be making a decision. You could make it now, or you could keep it in the budget and look at doing that in October.
We should point out, Tammy, that 50% of that is funded too. You'll see $8,600 on the revenue side.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Then they're just small additions for association dues, and with the engineering manager coming on, there's some safety clothing, cell phone, office furniture replacements or improvements due to ergonomic assessments. So some OH&S there. We've had reduced our general equipment, various reductions there because we've bought the equipment, it's no longer required. And then Public Works Garage casual labor is $6,000. This is part of saying we have to take our vacation time, so no carryovers, and that results in some vacation relief required. So there's $6,000 there. The Public Works Garage, there's $25,500 that's being proposed as additions, and this would see some renovations at our Public Works site. So lunchroom renovations, the salt shed door opener, permanent stairs, lead sampling program being proposed there. And then we have materials of $5,000 for screen asphalt millings and topsoil at the old dump. And then we have actually a tree branch chipping at $6,000 proposed, a rental of that for the old dump as well. And then some traffic control of $1,000 as an addition to our baseline, as we find that we're being required to provide more labor for special events than planned for. So there's $86,000 in engineering as additions and $30,000 coming out as donation.
So Tammy, just $6,000 to rent a machine to do wood chipping. Is that what you said?
Yep. Tree and branch chipping at the old dump.
I have no frame of reference for what one of those would cost, or a used one would cost. Would that also, similar to the postage machine, be something that staff would look at and say, we can find a used one for $10,000, so it makes more sense to buy a used one than to rent one for $6,000?
I'll let Larry speak to if that's already been looked at. If not, I'm assuming we would.
Because I would imagine we could use that every single year.
It is something that we could use, but the $6,000 is actually to have a contractor come in and do it. And there's a bit of a balance there because he takes the end product. So the actual cost would be more than what's shown. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Thanks, Larry. Good.
Any questions? Any other questions there? Okay. Wastewater management. So here, baseline, we'll see that there's some increases in electrical cost and charges there, and some of that's to reflect our labor of our electrician who's spending time there as well. So just reallocation of where we cost the salary to. And we'll see that there is an increase in the wastewater reserve as well. So that's part of increasing the wastewater rate. That results in additional monies being generated. I believe it's 102,000 more than last year. That would be generated and transferred to reserve. In terms of additions, we have 5,000 proposed for labor, and this is at our lift station. It's required, additional cleanings required for pump station 3 and 4. There's contractual services at 15,500. So we did want to have additional sampling of the Lehigh River. So there's 5,000 for that. There's also funds for BACAF sampling data at 5,500. And then there's for additional cleaning at pump station 3 and pump station 4 as well. We have lead sampling, small amount there for that. And then we have wastewater consulting, and there's 10,000 in there. So there's 2,000 for the sewer rate review and to kind of finalize that. And then 8,000 to look at a development fee model for how we could look at offsetting some of our infrastructure costs there. And then we have 7,000 in plant equipment to look at SCADA for emergencies. And we did reduce our budget by 13,200 there. So we looked at it mainly to do with training that was in the budget last year that's no longer required this year. It was completed, so some flow meter training and just some miscellaneous training as well in small equipment. Any questions on that?
Tammy, is BACAF still doing all their sampling given the situation we're in?
I don't know.
Do we know?
I'd have to, Larry? Okay. Do you know if BACAF is still doing the sampling?
I'm not sure, but it's something we can follow up on.
Yeah, we can see. Okay. All right, solid waste management is our next tab, I think, or is it? Yep, okay. So you'll see here that our waste site expenditures have gone down. So we've had a slight decrease, so $20,000. So that's our share of that with the Joint Services Board. I would point out that the Joint Services Board budget will be coming to council next week. We're proposing a special council meeting, but the numbers are incorporated in here already. You'll see that we have just a few small additions to this budget as well, and contractual services for garbage, for waste collection, and that's increased by 2,000, and it's based on a dwelling count. So when we entered into the contract, it would be based a fee per dwelling. Overall, our service levels have increased quite a bit in our cost based on numbers that Sue used, which wouldn't have been the numbers that this is based on. It was down slightly. In green carts, we took $3,000 out of our budget because the Joint Services Board has taken over the management of green carts for us. Any questions there? The arena, I don't have a slide for because it's fairly small, and it's pretty much business as usual. We have just, it's 10,000 as our baseline to basically keep that building there, and we do use it for storage of some equipment with parks, and we have $500 proposed there, which is just maintenance and repairs. In terms of parks and playgrounds, baseline is pretty much just adjustments for CPI for the most part. In terms of the additions, you'll see them listed there. Some of the more significant ones, we have $5,000 for tree sanitation. We had at the Bridgewater Skate Park, we're proposing $3,100 for a new pole and $35 a month for fees, and that's an electrical pole. A porta potty of $1,500 for the year. We have King Street Courts, $3,500 for a facility sign. And then, of course, we have $800 for rental of a crane to remove and install docks. In King Street Courts, we took $5,000 out for lights to the fountain. Kinsman Field, we took $5,000 out as we had money in there last year for a sign, and we had reduced the paint cost by $1,500. There's a small amount, $300 to install a new sign. The Aberdeen Green, there's $4,800 for, there's money in there for a concrete slab for a shelter, and then a facility sign at $3,500. Bridgewater Woodland Gardens, there's $4,300 for labor for trail development, walkway, and lookoff. And we removed $5,000 for a bridge and sign that was done last year. Glen Allen Park, there's $3,500 for a facility sign. And then Glen Allen Park, we removed $8,000 for a connector trail and bridge that was in our budget last year.
Is that a second sign for Glen Allen Park? There's already one for Glen Allen Park there. Is it a second sign somewhere else?
You'd have to defer to Larry on that.
All of these facility signs would be the new look, or the new sign with the white and blue bands with the stainless steel posts.
Isn't that what we have there on the entrance to that park closest to the hospital? I'm just wondering if maybe it's a sign that goes at the other end of the park.
Downstretch driveway, or?
Yeah.
I don't recall one being on Glen Allen there, but certainly we can check on.
I was pretty sure there was one there. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know if there's a new one. I don't know if there's a new sign with the new brand in that, but there was a sign at one time that said Glen Allen Park. But
yeah, maybe it's the old one with the green on it, not the blue. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Larry.
Centennial Trail, there's $2,000 for some ditching along Star Street. And then we took $2,100 out for from pocket parks because Old Town Hills was removed from that account, so that's why that's down. So overall, there's $31,200 in additions for parks and playgrounds, and we've removed 28,600 from the baseline. Any questions on that?
If I may, Tammy, just a question in regards to the docks. We have a new boat. Is it not possible for the boat to bring those things up and save the money for the backhoes and that kind of stuff? And don't we already have a backhoe?
That one I'll punt over to Larry.
We do use the backhoe for some of the floats. Some we don't, like the fountain and the ones that are stored near the new bridge. And we need the longer reach with the crane.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So transit services, here the baseline has just been adjusted by your salaries by CPI. And everything else is pretty much status quo. We do have. Oh.
Sorry, just one delayed question. Where are things with the fountain? I can't remember where we left that as a council.
I believe we reported that some component of it needed to be assessed. It wasn't working properly.
Okay.
So staff took it out early. And Larry, I think the cost was, did we determine the cost of it?
So last year there was an additional $10,000 in the budget. We removed the $5,000 because the light kits were purchased, but the connectors were not replaced. So this year's budget still has $5,000 to replace the connectors and the wiring to the motor.
And the motor works?
Yeah, it's the connectors and the wiring to the motor that's found to be the issue that needs to be replaced.
So the fountain can be turned back on.
Once the repair's done, if council decides to keep that money in the budget, once the repair's done, then it would be returned and installed.
Okay.
I have a feeling we're going to have a fountain debate discussion as we debate the budget going forward.
Yeah. Transit, just some small additions there. The big one is the 2,000 for defensive driving training, which makes sense. King Street parking, we have the town center parking lot, so we own that now. So we removed some of the funding that would have been in there for the lease. North Parkade, there's 10,000 that is in addition to our existing maintenance budget, which would be increased maintenance costs for the deck, and that is assuming that we have the capital improvements done.
Tammy?
Yeah.
Do we know what our payback is down the O'Neill parking lot? I know it cost us pretty near $17,000 for that lot. I just wonder if it justifies keeping it or we should get rid of that parking lot.
I don't know, Don, if you know that one right offhand. I don't know that I could get that information and bring it back to council.
No worries, that's fine. Thanks.
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, we can get that.
Yeah, I was just wondering how much it's being used and does it justify the amount we're spending? What's it costing us per vehicle? We should know now because we should know what they're paying for parking there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Community development. So in community development, we see that the baseline is pretty much similar with the exception of active transportation, which has seen a decrease of just over 30,000, 31,000, and that's because our active transportation plan has been revised, almost complete in terms of being revised. So we pulled that money out essentially of the baseline. In terms of additions in community development, there's 10,000, and that's for a student position and there is offsetting revenue. So I have asked all managers to not hire new staff until we get a better feel for where we are financially with the pandemic. But this is one of the positions that we have 100% offsetting revenue with some smart cities plus the grant. There's also 5,000 for furniture for that's required due to ergonomic assessments that were done. We pulled 15,000 out of the community development budget. So there used to be 50,000. There was 50,000 in last year for the facade program. And we found that based on usage, that's down. And so it was proposed that we reduce that by 15,000, which would bring it to 35,000. And that was also kind of in an effort to free up some funds to look at the economic development position as well. So we have the 10,000 that we reduced the regional economic development budget by, as well as the 15,000 here. And then we have 10,000 within the budget to provide some funds for implementing year 3 of the economic action plan. So that would look at things such as public art, the Smart Bridgewater's index work, and that type of thing. So there's 20,000 in additions and 15,000 removed. In terms of recreation, there has been some changes within the baseline. So programming is one that you'll see is down quite a bit. So we had last year we budgeted 133,000. That's on page 38 of your budget, 133,500. And this year the adjusted baseline is 88,500, and that's to kind of reflect actuals, which is projected at 83,000. So I did mention to council a few meetings ago that we're looking at doing a reevaluation of our recreation program offering to kind of get to the bottom of some of those numbers and determine what our offering, what our offering should be based on need and demand, to ensure that we are offering the right things and at the right times. So that does, though, have a decrease of about $45,000 from budget last year. And then fresh air films, there's $4,100 of additional monies in the baseline for that. In terms of additions, you'll see there's 3,600 being proposed for an online registration software license so that we can do online program registration. And then there's an amount of 1,800 for some furniture adjustments for an ergonomic assessment. It's completed. Any questions on community development? All right. So in terms of new revenue, some of the new revenue within our additions column shows that there's 350,000 of new revenue, and so this would include 3,000 for recovering some of the elections costs. So we still have to do the CSAP part of the school board elections. So we'll be doing that, and African Nova Scotian too, I believe. And then finance, we see an increase of 9,520 for tax certificates. So we increased the fees from 40 to 50, and just to reflect some additional volume there. And then we have 11,750 in donations that we've received that we would use to fund LCLC debt payments. The police services, we discussed that we would have 230,000 for the criminal records check contract and 80,000 for the dispatch contract. Engineering has a grant of 8,600, and that's for that energy management program that we mentioned you'd be reevaluating in October. So half of that's funded through that grant, and planning has a co-op grant of 8,000. So those are your new revenue sources. Some information on your operating reserves. So we're estimating that March 31st, 2020, there'd be $3.4 million. So we're using some of our operating reserves this year. So 11,750 is coming out in those LCLC donations. There's 150,000 that we had placed in reserve for transit for purchasing buses, so that's going to be used. Then some positives are we have a debenture that there's a balloon payment on, so we won't have those payments. And wastewater, there's money that would be going into reserve. And there's 300 coming out that was undesignated reserves too. And I believe, Don, that's to help offset is it the LCLC?
Yes, it's to help offset the large LCLC capital this year.
Yeah.
Tammy,
yeah.
Sorry, just a quick question, and it might relate more to the previous slide, but given the Canada Summer Job grants going to, Canada Summer Jobs going to 100% funding, do we get any of that? Do we have any students that we hire that are part of that program?
We're still waiting for the details to come out on that. I have actually asked Amanda to get us the details on whether or not we're eligible. I'm hoping we are. And because if we are, then that would obviously change the directive about not bringing on any new positions at this point, right? Because if they're 100% funded, it's a no-brainer, really. So,
sure.
But we'll find out.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, Bill McGinnis here. I know the answer to this question, but I want to ask it anyway. Should we have a surplus this year, fiscal year 1920? That would be going into reserve?
We will have a surplus, yeah.
If we have a surplus, it will be going into operating reserve.
Yes.
Okay, and that's not including these numbers?
No.
No.
No, I didn't think we.
No. No, I think there was a slide earlier, Councilor McGinnis, that showed that the projected surplus is 1.2 million.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah, for this year, yeah. Okay, so that's not in there, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
So there's 3.2 million that would be projected to 2021, excluding any operating surplus that might go in there this year. Capital reserves, our estimated balance is 2 million as of March 31st, 2020. We have some interest going into that reserve of 27,000. We're using 184,000 to fund some capital this year, so that will leave a balance estimated at 1.8 million on March 31st, 2021. And then we have this arrangement to pay back some loans that we may have borrowed from our reserves at some point in time. So if you do that, then it's 1.3 million would be there. In terms of, this is gas tax, so there's 922,000 estimated at March 31st, 2020. We get 700,000 in gas tax funding. We're using 1.3 million, 1.37 to fund capital this year, and that will leave a balance of 247,961 at the end of the fiscal year, March 31st, 2021. So every year we'll get 700,000 that goes back into that.
Tammy,
Council will recall that we got an extra top-up this year, a one-time top-up. So that's why why the balance is so high at the end of March 2020, is because our regular 700,000 and we got almost 700,000 in an additional top-up.
Yeah.
Has there been any indication from the federal government that that funding may increase, to be used for, obviously, to generate more economic action in the economy and so on?
There's been chatter about it, but nothing formal has come forward. And of course, we would want to make the argument at that point too that, that the formula kind of is unfairly distributed in terms of towns within the sector. But yeah, it would still be good, to have it more than 700,000.
And it would also be good if we could have more flexibility with it. Mm-hmm. It's, wastewater, some local roads, but there is still limited flexibility.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of your capital budget, when we presented this to you on March 30th, I believe it was, there was an amount of 5.6 million, 5,645,454. When council reviewed that, the direction that was given was to look at pavement renewal, which I believe we had 400,000 allocated in the capital budget, and to increase that by 200,000. So that would bring it to 5.845,454. We also presented to you a spreadsheet that showed you what the debt ratio was based on the budget at the time, and we had a 10-year borrowing term for our capital. So the direction was given to take a look at our larger wastewater capital projects because they have a longer lifespan than 10 years in terms of the infrastructure, and maybe look at a 15-year term. Hesitant to go over 15 because then you're into balloon payments and those types of things. So Don did do that, and this slide here shows you that revised debt service ratio. So it's really in the latter part that you see the change. So we were up to 15 point something, I believe, in 28, 29, or 29, 30, and that's now down, slightly down a bit. Didn't do a huge change, but it did improve it a bit by looking at a 15-year term. The other thing that council did was ask us with the capital budget to ensure that we do that check-in with council on our larger capital items this year before going out to tender, to make sure that, you know, as we kind of assess the impact of the pandemic on the town financially and our community, whether or not we have the appetite for some of the capital this year. So Larry is working on a report that'll come to council that will kind of highlight, here's the project that we need to start in May, and here's the project that we would need to start in June, and get some direction on where you want to go.
And if I can just add, I know time is of the essence, and with all the things that are happening, and I believe Councillor McDonald raises at the last meeting that we don't want projects to be delayed and put us in an unfavorable position as we start competing with other municipalities. Mm-hmm. So just maybe, and Councillor can feel free to jump in and disagree with me. I think when Larry's preparing a report, it doesn't have to be super long and detailed just because I do know time is of the essence. It just kind of, you know, just lay out what the project is and the high points for it, so that we can just make a quick decision for them. Yeah. Yep.
That's the plan.
I just wanted to make a comment on the debt ratios, and I think this really illustrates that we really need funding from other levels of government to accomplish what we need to do with wastewater. And I know it's been discussed before, but this kind of illustrates the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
Don, you don't have any money in there at all for funding. It's just gas tax money at this time, right?
Yeah, only confirmed funding is in there.
Yeah. So reality is, if we get any funding at all, those numbers will drop.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Good.
It's probably a good time to also just remind the public that the gas tax funding we're talking about is based on, it's not based on need, it's based on population. So you can have a large population with no infrastructure obligations, and you will get more gas tax money than a town or a city that has a smaller population but massive infrastructure needs, like Bridgewater.
Yeah.
So it's disproportionate.
Yeah.
And the other thing to point out with our capital budget in the 10-year capital plan is that there is a huge emphasis on wastewater. In fact, it consumes most of your 10-year capital plan. And a lot of the quality of wastewater is a quality of life thing, but when you think of quality of life, you also think about parks and amenities. And a lot of those things have been pushed out into further years because the room's not there, the capacity is not there from a financial capacity to do them until then because of wastewater. So if we do get more funding, it can help your debt ratio, but it can also free up some room to look at some of those projects that we've had to push way out, like Generations Active Park, those things.
Bill McGinnis here. Most businesses, at least when I was in business, operate on a 5-year cycle. We're operating on a 10-year cycle. It's sort of like the 5-day forecast. It's never accurate, and this is no reflection on our ability to project. But it's difficult for us to determine what the cost of things are going to be 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
We have no idea what government funding is going to be. People are going to look at that and say that, when we put these numbers out there, they think they're accurate. I think anything after 5 years is not accurate. And I'm really reluctant to put it out there.
Yeah. It's more to illustrate that wastewater is, if you look at a 5-year window, we know that the next 10 to 20 years is going to be absorbed with wastewater. So it's to make you aware that, and to make everyone aware that if there are going to be capital demands beyond the 5 years that year 5 could impact. So just be aware of them. But you're right, it's a crystal ball. Sometimes it's even a crystal ball at year 5 and 4, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay. This is just a graph to show you where our projected debt's going to be and how much. So you can see that, and by March 31st, we'll be close to March 31st. 2031, sorry, we're going to be close to 20 million in debt. And then, of course, when you have debt, there's debt servicing cost that goes along with that. And that's funded through our operating. So when you think about right now, I believe we're 874,000 this year in debt service payments, or thereabouts. This will bring us up over 3 million in 2031, based on what we know. So it drives home the point that we need that funding, that government funding to really support our budget. Otherwise, we will have large debt servicing costs.
But again, Bill McGinnis, to my point, people are going to look at that and take it for real. And, there's just no way we're going to be there.
I don't think we can without that funding.
Yeah, that's right. And there probably will be funding there. There always has been. So I'm hesitant to project that far out and say we're going to be, in 2030, we're going to be $20 million in debt. Because in reality, we're not. I mean, the town could grow. We could, we have another major development town. There's a lot of things happening.
Yeah, you could. And
that's just my view.
Yeah, and we did have a scenario that showed you what this would look like if we had 2/3 funding for our wastewater projects, and your debt service ratios are a lot different. Yeah. And this is just showing you your debt service ratios in a different way. So, what's next, or what now? Council debate of the proposed budget. So we've had it presented to you tonight. It's a lot to take in. We can look at setting another date, unless you're prepared to have a full debate tonight. But if you want to absorb it and give it some thought, then we can set another date. We're proposing perhaps maybe April 20th to continue with the debate on the budget. If you have some things that you would like to see changed now, we can take that direction now as well. Just remember, any change that you make if it's an increase, it has to have an offset in order to keep the budget balanced. And this, of course, is Don's slide of thank you to everyone for their contributions to the budget, and the strategic management team, and of course the finance team, who worked very hard to put the budget document together.
Questions?
David, it's Andrew here. Just more question about questions. Questions that we have. Would you prefer those be during a council session, or can we fire off a list of questions to to Tammy, copying town council so that everyone's aware of what the questions are. How do you want to proceed with that, I guess?
Yeah, I think this was a lot. I mean, first, let me say, Tammy, that's amazing. 33 slides, like that's a lot of detail. And so I really appreciate the detail that you guys have all gone in. And I appreciate for council and even people watching online, this is a lot of information. So I think I'm fine with questions going to Tammy and CCing council, knowing that the question and the answer will come back to the public.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the next at a public meeting, because I know this is a lot, and I'm sure like as soon as we ask our one question and someone else has moved on, you're going to come up with your other questions, because that's at least how my brain works. So I'm good with people not only sending their questions they get, but over the next week or two, you're going to get questions from members of the public, and we want those answered as well. Does anyone have anything on this right now? Any questions that did come up right now? Okay, so
Perhaps,
Tammy, oh, sorry, yep.
Just perhaps just one major one, I guess, and I don't know if you've got any new information, but the interchange project, no word on that slowing down or anything like that, is there?
No, we met last week as a project team, and it's proceeding. Yeah.
I would imagine it would be in a basket of post-COVID projects that they want to get people working. The timing was probably good to get that as close to shovel ready as we can when we're done this.
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the options, as you can see there, is so we don't normally have a council meeting on the third Monday of the month now, but one is proposed there. Tammy, we did talk about maybe the need for a special one anyway, right? So we are planning one for the 20th. So the budget will come back for discussion next Monday, correct?
Yes. Yep.
And so depending on how we go, we can, any one of those Mondays can be the Monday that it gets approved, depending on when the debate and discussion is completed, right?
Yep.
Are there any other questions at this time? I almost forgot. We still have like a whole agenda left to go through. Sorry.
Yeah, it's late. But I can give you one question and we talk about it every year. And really, it's about Canada Day and Christmas on La Have, and where we have to fund traffic control and fund the police out of the small budgets. And yet when something like the exhibition comes along for the whole week, putting the barricades up, taking them down, extra police, traffic control, there's no charge. So, and I think each budget should have an amount in there so that the two committees of the town in particular, and probably a couple more of them, wouldn't have to fundraise as much if it was used a little more fair.
So that's a good point, Wayne. I know we had talked about this. I know we didn't give any direction, but I know that this came up a few times on what would it cost if those committees didn't have to fundraise for those amounts. What would the impact be? So can that be brought forward next week? That if council decided that for at least those committees, so Canada Day and Christmas on La Have, so those are ours.
Yeah.
If we didn't want those committees to have to then fundraise to pay the town back for work that it does for our own committees, what does that look like? Did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, really, it's just a revenue stream for the town because, like I said before, the wages are paid once the budget's passed. So any income they get comes in as a revenue stream that goes back into reserve.
I have a sad feeling that Canada Day is not going to be an issue this year.
Well, it will be next year.
Correct.
Bill McGinnis here. I have another thing that I'd like to see in the budget. Whether we act on it or not is another story. There's a lot of things happening and we're very busy with a lot of things. One of our top priorities is our downtown. And we've talked about a bid committee for years. And I would like to see something put in there for, I don't know what it would cost, to institute a bid committee. Or at least to make a step in that direction.
So the only thing in the budget at this point is an economic development officer position that would be focused on business development, of which, you know, the downtown area would be one of those areas, which could be a dedicated resource to a business improvement district. But yeah.
So further to Councillor McGuinness's question, then, if we were to pass the budget with the position for economic development officer in there, should there be some additional resources, monetary resources for that position, so their own budget, in order to facilitate perhaps putting together a bid? Or is that something that you think is like in next year's budget, for example?
Patrick, if Patrick were here, he'd probably kick me, but he's not in the same room as me, so he won't kick me. We do have the Regional Economic Development Fund. If you remember, I think we reduced that by 10, so we had 23 in there. So there's 13,000 remaining in that fund, and that's to look at economic development initiatives that were more regional in scope. There could be a little bit of room in there to accommodate some investigation, but I would suggest that if this position there's 6 months in the budget for this position, so by the time the position gets in place and orientated and familiar with the business community, and it probably would be closer to next fiscal year before we'd be in a position to actually spend some real money creating a bid.
Other questions?
It's Cheryl Fagier. I just have a comment. If councillors decide to send their questions off in the next week or so and come back to the 20th, meaning maybe we could make a decision at the 27th or the 11th. Just feeling that a little bit more time would be appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. I even though I said we could technically approve it next week, the expectation is that it would be on one of the days that is likely a regular scheduled council meeting. So the 27th or the 11th is most likely. I think a week isn't enough time to seek public input either. So having at least 2 weeks minimum for that, I think, is important for our community. So your point is well taken, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move back to our regularly scheduled items?
Just a comment, maybe Patrick's got this sort of underway, but I know we've posted some information about the budget and so on. Are we doing any kind of, I don't know, it's not really a survey, but just questions or a feedback page on the website or wherever that allows people to give some feedback?
So Patrick and I had a little bit of a chat about this a few weeks ago, and then had another chat yesterday while we were shooting the video in the afternoon. One of the original plans at the early stages of the pandemic was, although we couldn't do a Talk Bridgewater session like we'd done in the mall, we could perhaps do one online. And then kind of everything came off the rails, and the days seemed to get shorter, and there were so many things pulling us in different directions. But I think it might be something that we can do if we even encourage people to send us their questions. I know there's people watching online now. I saw at one point there were 23 people watching Council tonight. So encouraging people to leave comments, I think is one way. I can certainly put it in my daily updates. I did put it today that Council was discussing budget, so perhaps I can be a little bit more direct about asking people to send us those questions. Does anyone have any other ideas on how we tackle that?
Yeah, it's Cheryl here. I think is using social media platform, your page, Mayor Mitchell. Yeah, so if we can engage as many of the public, it's important to hear from them.
I think, Andrew here, I think a dedicated time, through this, literally what we're doing today, 10 minutes or whatever for people to ask online questions, and Patrick could feed those through. And I think it'd be actually kind of engaging for some people.
So so just hearing that, can we try that on the 20th? Is that something we can try? Like if we said that the budget is a timed item again at 6 o'clock, then from 6 to 6:15, for example, as we're discussing it, the first 15 minutes at least, I mean, there's no reason why we have to make it that short, but that could be, to your point, Andrew, that if questions are coming in, perhaps, I know Pat is kind of online now. We can see his little icon, but obviously he's muted because he's working. But maybe that's something where he can, in the chat box, send us, this question came in, that question came in. We can always try it, and if it works, then awesome. And if it doesn't work, we can find a different way.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Everyone think that sounds like a good plan?
Good idea. Yeah.
It might actually wind up with us having more engagement, even though we try every year. We might get even more. So let's try that next week.
Great.
No harm.
Perfect.
Any other questions on budget before we move into the rest of the meeting? Okay. Again, thank you, Tammy, Dawn, Larry, the two chiefs, and everybody for Jessica, I see is on, for your hard work. Yeah, well done. Well done. Okay, we'll move back. The next item is all the way back up to minutes. So we have the minutes from the March 23rd regular scheduled council meeting there. Any errors or omissions? Hearing none, we'll declare the minutes approved and go down to planning items. We have a request for postponement of the public hearing for 12 Kensington Court. I don't know why I'm tongue-tied. Kensington Court. Is there any additional information?
Not really. This is related to having to figure out how to host a virtual public hearing. And so we needed a bit more time based on the advertising requirements. We couldn't meet that timeline to get in for the 27th, but the public hearing was scheduled by a motion of council, so we require a new motion of council to postpone it to the May 11th meeting.
Okay, I understand MODL had a public hearing today. Do we know how theirs went? Was it successful?
I wrote to my counterpart over there, and he said it went very well. Yeah, he said they used a slightly different system than we're considering right now. So they were taking questions live on Facebook. They had a call-in phone number and a few things like that. So we're trying to set up our system similarly. There's a wide range of ways that different municipalities across the province are tackling holding a virtual public hearing. So we're trying to find something that will work well for us, but we're going to ask I believe our plan right now is we'll ask people to register so we can send them meeting invitation to the Microsoft Teams. So if they want to do a presentation, then they would be able to do that, and also have an audio line where people could also make a phone call in. So those are some of the ways we're going to overcome it.
Great, thank you. Any questions?
Would you like a motion?
Yes, please.
I move that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater postpone the public hearing for 12 Kensington Court to rezone from single unit residential R1 to 2-unit residential R2, originally set by motion 20-070 on March 23rd, 2020 to the May 11th, 2020 meeting of council.
Thank you. Seconded by?
Councillor Fagier will second the motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Question.
Question being called. So Councillor McGuinness, yay or nay?
Yay.
Councillor Fagier?
Yay.
Councillor Thorburn?
Yay.
Councillor McDonald?
Yay.
Councillor Graves?
Yay.
Deputy Mayor Tanner?
Yay.
And myself, yay. So the motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to the next item, non-substantive amendment to development agreement for 144 Victoria Road.
That's me.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
A little bit.
A little bit. I think it gets better as I keep talking.
Okay, there you
That's
go.
what's happened so far. So I'm going to share the screen quickly. Okay. So staff received an application from Frontline Properties to amend the development agreement at 144 Victoria Road, and that's to increase the footprint of the building and accommodate the resulting changes to the overall site and the building characteristics. This requires replacing schedules B, C, and D of the development agreement and adding an additional clause to section 4, which is the building characteristics section. So the subject property is located near the corner of Victoria Road and York Street, shown on the map there with the star. The property is zoned as comprehensive residential, or R3. The surrounding properties are zoned as single unit residential, high density residential, neighborhood commercial, special commercial, and institutional. And the surrounding land uses are single, 2, 3, and multi-unit dwellings, office and sales, and cemeteries. So the original application for development agreement was for a 3-story, 30-unit affordable residential development targeted to seniors. And the development agreement was a concurrent application, so it went along with the municipal planning strategy amendment to redesignate the subject property to comprehensive residential, and 126 Victoria Road and 229 York Street, which are adjacent properties, to limited commercial, as well as a land use bylaw amendment to rezone the subject property to comprehensive residential and 126 Victoria Road and 229 York Street to neighborhood commercial. And that development agreement was approved by council at the January 14th, 2019 public hearing. So there's 2 types of development agreement amendments, substantive and non-substantive. Substantive amendments require a resolution of council, a new development agreement, and a public hearing, whereas non-substantive amendments require a resolution of council, and this is a non-substantive amendment. So the purpose of the amendment is to accommodate increased unit sizes, and the reason for this change is that the applicant has been negotiating with the province of Nova Scotia regarding the building design, and that's because it's affordable housing, and some of the changes would need to be made to fulfill their requirements. So these changes would result in an increase of the building footprint by about 15%, a reduction in the roof height by about 10 feet, changes in the shape of the roof, some slight landscaping changes, and some separate changes to the exterior building colors. And this would require replacing schedules of the development agreement. So Schedule B would be replaced with an updated site plan, Schedule C with an updated landscaping plan, and Schedule D with updated elevation drawings. And the town's building inspector also noted that future changes to the exterior cladding material might be required for the National Building Code requirements. So an additional subsection is being proposed within the text of the development agreement as well. So the development agreement outlines the substantive matters. One of the matters is the permitted use of the property, which is 1 multiple unit dwelling with a maximum of 30 1-bedroom units in substantive accordance with the site plan and elevation drawings. 3 of the 30 units must be affordable housing. Any uses already permitted as of right in the underlying zone of the land use bylaw, and 34 dwelling units in total. And I just wanted to note that the 34 dwelling units incorporates another 4-unit building plan for the future of the adjacent property. It was originally included within the development agreement, but these amendments don't affect that building. The other substantive matter in the DA is the minimum setbacks to the rear lot lines of the adjacent properties on St. Philip Street and 150 Victoria Road. But as mentioned, this is a non-substantive agreement because these matters that I just listed are not being changed. The use is the same, and it's the front lot line setback that would be changed with the increase in the building footprint, not the other ones that I listed. So the development agreement contains a site plan, landscaping plan, and elevation drawings, which would be replaced. Since sections 4 and 5 of the development agreement are being affected, change in schedules are required because they're mentioned in these sections. Section 4 outlines the building characteristics and property line setbacks, while Section 5 outlines landscaping requirements. So the changes proposed for the site plan are a building footprint increase from 8,350 square feet to 9,890 square feet, as well as changes to the front lot line setback. And the front lot line setback is currently between 43 and 73 feet along the building. And with the increased building width, it would shrink slightly to between 38 and 64 feet from that property line. And the changes proposed for the landscaping plan would also be a change in the building footprint as the building is shown in that plan, as well as a slight reduction to a grassy area and some furnishings between the building and the front parking spaces. The landscaping is actually minimally affected with this, but it is changed. And the changes proposed through the elevation drawings are shown here. So the top is the original front elevation for the building, and the bottom is the proposed front elevation. Most of the roof would actually be reduced in height by 10 feet. The tallest section of the roof would be 48 feet instead of 50, but the majority of the roof would be 40 instead of 50. And the roof peaks would also run the width of the building, so from front to the back, rather than along the length, which is shown in the original drawing. And I just wanted to mention that the roof on the original drawing is at a 45-degree angle, although it's depicted to be straight up there. The reduction in roof height and changes to the orientation of the roof peaks are required to structurally accommodate the building footprint increase. That's why those would be changing. And overall, the shape of the roof is different as the orientation of the peaks changed. So the proposed building, as you can see now, appears as some smaller, distinct buildings with six roof peaks, rather than the original one, which looks more like 3 buildings. And this adds a vertical visual separation at the front and the rear of the building, as does the proposed color changes of the exterior. So as you can see, the proposed drawings add red to the existing gray and beige color scheme that was originally included.
Much more attractive.
Yeah.
The town's building inspector will complete a detailed review of the drawings when the applicant applies for the building permit. But upon quick review of the proposed changes, no issues arose in comparison to the original drawings. But it was noted that the building material may be required to change to a non-combustible material on one section of the building. So a subsection to section 4 is proposed in the development agreement. And it would say any changes to the elements described in subsection A and shown on Schedule D are permitted only if required by the National Building Code and shall be to the satisfaction of the development officer. So another amendment wouldn't be needed. And a policy analysis was completed for the original development agreement, and the development is still deemed as compatible with adjacent uses and properties. The building height would be reduced. The changes to the lot line setbacks would only be at the front towards the driveway of the development. And the cladding style is similar, with the color being the main change. And there would be no changes to servicing, traffic, or environmental considerations. So it's recommended that the Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater amend the existing development agreement regarding the property located at 144 Victoria Road by adding subsection C to section 4 and replacing Schedule B, C, and D with the site plan, landscaping plan, and elevation drawings that were attached.
Questions from members of council? I certainly like the proposed changes to the look of it.
Huge improvement.
Yeah. Do you want a motion, Your Worship?
Yes, please.
I would move that Town Council of the Town of Bridgewater amend the existing development agreement for the property located at 144 Victoria Road to accommodate an increase of the building footprint and the resultant changes by adding subsection C to section 4 and replacing Schedule B, C, and D with a site plan, landscaping plan, and elevation drawings attached respectively as Appendix B, C, and D as presented in document 18-104E.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Graves. Further discussion?
Question.
Questions being called. We'll go around the other way. Yea or nay, Deputy Mayor Tanner?
Yay.
Councillor Graves?
Yay.
Councillor McDonald?
Yay.
Councillor Frazier?
Yay.
Sorry, I missed you, Councillor Thorburn.
Yay.
Councillor McGuinness?
Yay.
And I am yay. Thank you. Motion is carried. Next item is just correspondence from information from the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing and its proposed amendments to the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations. That's there for your information. If you have any questions, you can probably speak to our building inspector or someone in community development, perhaps. Moving down, no correspondence for action, and we already dealt with the first one under reports and recommendations. So we'll go down to appointment to the Bridgewater Active Transportation Advisory Committee. Is someone prepared to make a motion?
I will make the motion, Mayor
Thank
Mitchell.
You.
Yep. Yes, that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater endorse the recommendation of staff and appoint Ann Harding and Jay Gilmore to sit on the Bridgewater Active Transportation Advisory Committee as resident representatives, each for a 3-year term effective immediately.
Thank you. Seconded by?
I'll second that. Andrew?
Deputy Mayor Tanner, any discussion?
Question?
Questions being called. Councillor McGuinness?
Yay.
Councillor Frazier?
Yay.
Councillor Thorburn?
Yay.
Councillor McDonald?
Yay.
Councillor Graves?
Yay.
Deputy Mayor Tanner?
Yay.
Self, so I'm in favor. So thank you. Motion is carried. Our next item is the building inspection report for March 2020. Not as great as some of the other ones we've had. I don't imagine that when we get April's, it will look amazing. But I do think that Mr. Swain is correct that at the end of this, there is opportunity. We saw that at the end of the 08-09 financial crisis, that there was opportunity and there was growth after. So, we're a strong town. We'll come back. So, if you have any questions about the report, you can reach out to the through the CAO to the staff person.
I suspect we're not alone, Mr. Mayor.
No, I don't think there's too many new cranes going up in downtown Halifax this month. So it'll be very interesting to see how people change. We've seen businesses change and businesses adapt. We've seen people who are not business people suddenly become micro entrepreneurs. And so I think our town is positioned well for the future, but we just have to weather this storm first. The other item there, next item there rather, is Lunenburg County Senior Safety Program. I can't imagine what our staff person there is having to deal with every day during this situation with seniors and the stress that seniors are under. I don't know where we would be without this program. I think I say that every month when we have a good month, and I can't imagine what the next few months are going to look like. So thank goodness we have this program and the partnerships that we do. Are there any questions on that? No. Next item is a donation, South Shore Fieldhouse Society. So correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, but this is just the same in and out as it normally is. Someone has made a donation to the Fieldhouse through the town, and so the town then takes that and gives it back?
That's correct.
Okay, so this is, just want to be clear for the public, this is not a new grant from the town to the Fieldhouse, it's just flows through us. Is someone prepared to make that motion?
Yes, Your Worship, I'd make that. Move the Town Council of the Town of Bridgewater approve a grant in the amount of $300 to the South Shore Fieldhouse Society for the multi-use facility on Glen Allen Drive as per document 20-0730.
Thank you. Seconded by?
Second the motion.
I heard Councillor Frazier the loudest, so seconded by Councillor Frazier. Okay, Councillor McGuinness?
Yay.
Councillor Frazier?
Yeah, yay.
Councillor Thorburn?
Yay.
Councillor McDonald?
Yay.
Councillor Graves? Councillor Graves?
He's napping.
Yay.
There we go.
There you go. Sorry about that.
That's okay, Deputy Mayor Tanner.
Yay.
Myself in favor, so motion is carried. Thank you. Our last item is the first reading of the town property bylaw. So this, of course, we've had to make some changes. As we know, the province through this Health Protection Act mandated the closure of all parks in the province. The innocent bystander in this, unfortunately, is that we have trails that are in areas we've designated as parks. So some, like the duck pond, that is in a park. It's a park predominantly. So this is not going to be part of this, what we're doing. But others like Generations Active Park and Glen Allen Park are essentially trails. And so the goal here is to work through the bylaw here to have a few more trails open for the public, because as we've seen with the nice weather like today, people want to be outside, and we've actually funneled them into fewer options for walking by having some trails removed in terms of access. So this should, by the middle of May, unfortunately, this should correct some of that and give some of those trails, get some of those trails reopened. Anything you want to add to that, Tammy?
Yeah, Yeah, so the bylaw, the report that staff has and the bylaw options that are presented really give you two scenarios. One is there's a ton of housekeeping amendments to this bylaw that as we were going through it realized it needed to be cleaned up. So you'll see some of that in there. And then the other is to look at how we designate parks and how we designate trails. And you'll note that the staff report's actually recommending that we not make the change. There's some concern, and ultimately it's up to council at the end of the day. There's probably no right or wrong here with respects to the way you could go. Some of the concern, and Scott can speak to that as our police chief, is with respects to being able to adequately enforce if you have say Glen Allen Trail, for example, that Glen Allen Park, but it's a trail, they step off the trail, are they in the park? It's difficult for an enforcement piece, and there's some concern about confusion within the community with things being open, things being closed. Are we allowed on this? So if the amendments were to go through designating certain parks, trails, such as the Glen Allen Park or Riverside or Riverview, I believe it is, then we'd have to make sure that there was a lot of communication around that, so that it was clear what's open and what's closed. But we prepared the amendments both ways so that you could, if you wish to proceed with the trails, like the Glen Allen Park type trail, and have that designated a trail so it can be open during this state of emergency, then we can certainly do that. And I think you'll probably find that across Nova Scotia, there's some that have varied that. Like even today, I was mentioning to our management team that Moncton has their Centennial Trail Park open. So there are municipalities doing it, which is why I say there's nothing right or wrong about it. But maybe Scott, I don't know if you want to speak to the enforcement piece, just so the council understands that side of it.
Yeah, so for us, it comes down to enforcement. We've basically educated the public to where what's open, what's closed, and if you're caught in one of those spots that you're prepared to receive, whether it be a summary offense ticket or long form information in regards to what's closed. If we start opening trails that have been closed, have been opened, it's just confusing to the public, and we have to start that process of education back over. Next thing, we're catching somebody in the park at Glen Allen or say the Duck Pond, and they use the excuse, well, I thought this park was open now because it was closed. It was opened. It was closed. So it's setting it's setting us back in terms of enforcement or education.
But Scott, the parks that are closed continue to have signage and barricades where they're closed. So I tend to disagree in terms of like the enforcement should be pretty straightforward because they would have had to pass a barricade or a sign that said it's closed.
Correct. Yeah. Sort of. If you're coming into the duck pond, you can get into the duck pond without really, coming to a yard or whatever, and they use the excuse, well, we thought this one was open now. We walked into our yard or, in through the woods at the museum, even though, we just had people at Shipyards Landing this weekend and moved the barricades to put boat in the water. So, they literally put trucks in commercial fishing and they unloaded the boat and crab traps and started fishing in the river. So, there's people will push back on all extents. We're trying, police across the province are trying to do the best they can as keeping people social distancing and no large groups. I understand where council's coming from. To us, it's just a matter of refocusing, resetting, and then there may be some education around it. And once again, if they're off in the wooded area on Glen Allen, are they in the park or are they in the trail? Is it going to be considered a whole trail system that's wide open in the woods? I don't know. It's open for interpretation, and it comes back to us to prove the intent that they were, breaking the law on purpose or willfully. So it's just a concern of law enforcement. Right now, we know everything is closed except for the Centennial Trail.
May I ask a question?
Yep.
It's Jennifer. Is there something we could do? Because I really understand the chief's perspective here that we don't want to set people up for fines and difficulty. We don't want to set our officers up for, you know, petty arguments in a park. That's not productive for anyone. At the same time, I'm very concerned about mental health and about the connectivity for those who don't necessarily have access to vehicles and so on. There's a number of reasons why I see both sides. If we could we do something that better outlines the expectations and through signage? Can we put up signs that say that you are permitted here on the trail surface only? You are to remain 6 feet from any other person. You know, you're not to roam off of the trail. Really make it very clear and defined what you are able and unable to do in these spaces.
You can post signage to effect. Yeah, it's gonna you're just gonna rely on people to follow them, but make it clear. Right. I think the messages have been pretty clear now about social distancing and stuff like that. I think it's a delineation of the trail versus the park and how we do that, so that it's clear to people when you're not on the trail anymore, right? And how big of an issue is it going to be? I don't know. I just know that when it, the conversations have occurred is that when it comes to enforcement, it can get a little gray in situations like that. So the effectiveness of the order might not be the same. The intent was to ensure that people aren't congregating in places and that you're able. So if you're able to do that and allow them to use the trail and it's clear, signage can help, communication can help. But you're probably you're not going to prevent situations, with the signage from occurring, I would think.
No, you're correct. If you look at Glen Allen, you have housing on Sweeney Lane and the cul-de-sac, and as well as Stretch Drive. So realistically, you get into Glen Allen Park at any residence or walk in through any yard. It just makes it tougher to enforce if the trails are open. If they go in through the yard and they're in the park and they have a note saying, well, sorry, we're making our way to the trail. We're cutting through the neighbor's property to get to the trail, which really what's open, the park or the trail. And if it's all closed, it's all closed. It's just much more straightforward for any type of enforcement issue.
So to me, the trails, especially the ones we're talking about here, so Glen Allen and Generations Active Park come to mind. So those especially brand new trails, very clearly, gravel. There should be zero. I know there will be. There should be zero confusion. Whereas the duck pond, I can understand that one because it's a trail very much in a park where there's little offshoots and it's a kind of a different beast there. But my concerns are the same as Councillor McDonald's concerns, that we've told people to stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home. We're 4 weeks into this. We're talking about something that, if we approve these changes, don't even take effect for 5 weeks? 4 more weeks? 1, 2, 3, 4 more weeks.
Yeah.
So you've got 8 weeks of people with fewer options to get out, and the weather's going to be nicer. So I'm concerned. I guess I'm concerned less about the confusion and more about what happens when people feel they can't leave their house. So I guess that's where I'm at.
I echo your concerns because it's only going to get worse as the days get nicer.
Yeah. I did see that they had some issues at the Commons in the city, and then opened up a path that they could walk through because they were arresting people who were in the Commons.
Yeah.
So,
well, today was a perfect indication. There were definitely more people out today. Teenagers sitting in driveways, separating themselves, which was great to see. But they were definitely there.
Oh, yeah. You're absolutely right. The Centennial Trail was packed today.
Yeah, and so by reducing the number of trails, you are, like I said, you are funneling people into a reduced number of avenues for them to actually have that physical distancing that we're asking them to do. Anyway, that's my case to be made for moving forward with the amendments.
David?
Sorry, go ahead,
yes,
Wayne.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, I'm on the parks quite a bit, and the people that use that part theoretically would be the people that live in the area where those trails are, because the only other way to get over there from our side is to take a car and park, which we know we can't do. So I don't see it as a major concern because it's going to generate some traffic over there. But on this side of the river, we have our access to our trails. Over there, there's really nothing. So I would support continuing with that to give them some place to walk.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McDonald?
I'm just wondering, Scott, kind of Chief, your take on when you take things from people and they start to resist and start to bend and break rules. Do you think giving a little bit might get a little more from them? I mean, I'm not out there enforcing in public, so I don't know, if that's an idealistic thought or if it's realistic.
Yeah, I think it's everybody's discretion, what they do, right? Some are going to take advantage of it and use it properly, and there will be those who will not follow the rules, and that's just like everything. It's I understand what you're trying to do, and once again, to us, it really doesn't matter. It just means, we may have some enforcement and education issues, which, we will deal with on case-by-case basis. Officers always have discretion, and sometimes, it's worth a warning rather than a stern hand.
Scott, Chief?
Yes.
Are you getting any complaints with four-wheelers? Because I see lots of signs of activity on the Centennial Trail lately.
Yeah, so we were actually on the trail a number of times today and stopped both a side-by-side, which fled from our members, and a motorcycle. So, yeah, we've stepped up with the amount of people walking, our visibility, on the weekends and throughout the days on the trails, trying to, keep everybody safe.
Yeah,
but yes, you are correct. We are seeing an increase with all-terrain vehicles or UTVs on the Centennial Trail.
Yeah,
and not only that, we did charge somebody for going through McDonald's drive-through on a four-wheeler Friday night. So it's not just the trails, it's on the streets as well.
Brilliant, just brilliant.
Yeah.
All right. So let's.
So what are we doing?
Yeah. So this it depends like what council wishes. So the first motion is staff's recommendation. The second one is the one that actually moves this forward to begin the process of opening up the trails. So I'll leave it to council.
And I would just point out that if you look at Appendix C in the report, that's what, if you wish to proceed and open up some of the trails that are there are the Centennial Trail is already open, but Generations Active Park, Glen Allen Park, Hollingsworth Connector Trail, Mission Spur Line, and Pinecrest Park Playground Trail.
Right, just the trail, not the playground.
Yeah. I just have a clarification question. So it would be the same that the residents would have to walk to these trails, say Glen Allen Park as well. They cannot drive, correct?
Correct.
Right.
That's the direction that's been given, and we've blocked off parking access, so like to the dog park and that side of Generations Active Park.
Although apparently you can still launch your boat if you want to move the barricades.
Yeah.
If there's any other parks that you would want to have in there, you'd have to identify anything other than what is listed in the proposed schedule here.
But the issue there becomes, and correct me if I'm wrong, either Jessica or the chief, that then we are starting to move into what is a park and less a trail, where the ones we've noted here are 99% of the use is trail. Okay.
Correct. You're graying the water even more.
Yeah, so we don't want to do that. We don't want to make the chief departer, especially because he's brought all this new revenue for for his department. What is the wish of council? Someone prepared to make a motion?
Is that with Appendix C?
It is the second motion there, Appendix C.
All right, I can move it.
If you don't mind.
Okay.
Sure.
I would move that town council for the town of Bridgewater endorse the intent of the amended town property bylaw, currently chapter 156, to clarify language, intention, on authority by repealing the existing bylaw and replacing it with a revised bylaw as per Appendix A of document 20-077, including schedules A, B, C, and D, designating some parts as trails in order to remain open during the pandemic, as they appear in Appendix C of document 20-077, and proceed to the second reading of the bylaw at a council meeting to be held on May 11th, 2020, and authorize staff to publish all public notice pursuant to Section 168 of the Municipal Government Act.
Thank you. The seconder,
I'll second that. Bill McGinnis.
seconded by Councilor McGinnis. Further discussion?
I just have one more question before we move forward.
Yes.
Chief, can you tell me how we asked about four-wheelers, but we didn't ask how are people doing with kind of public spaces and gatherings at this point? Have you had a lot of trouble? Have there been any fines?
Yeah, so we have issued summary offense tickets under both the Emergency Measures Act as well as the Health Act. Not right off the bat, obviously, we try to educate, and it's both repeat offenders that are now starting to see the enforcement side. So,
okay, so we're not without our offenders.
Right. So most people are very compliant, and we're not going to argue about 5 feet or 6 feet. It's back up a little bit, and you're doing well. Keep going.
Are you able to give us maybe a couple of examples? Like, is it that people are having a house party still, or it's that people are standing 6 inches from each other?
Exactly. So most of ours under the Emergency Measures Act are self-isolation for not self-isolating after returning into the province for 14 days. The other one is social distance, not so much groups, but more the social distancing rather than, groups of exceeding 5. We're seeing more of, a foot from each other, whether it be walking or standing in a public space. That being said, the federal government now is tracking, so we're starting to see people returning to the country where we are now obligated to follow up from the federal government. So they're coming through one of the 3 airports, and now if somebody's returning to within the town limits, we receive their name and documentation, and we're obligated to do periodic checks of them for the next 14 days.
And it was announced this morning by the federal government that, of course, they have to submit a quarantine plan for 14 days. And if they can't submit a viable plan, they actually they're put into a hotel.
Okay.
So
I did see that. It's constantly evolving every day.
Yeah. So at least you're notified. So that's helpful.
Yeah. But we have seen an increased amount of COVID calls, as well as other routine calls over the last week or week and a half. Our calls and violent crimes have increased.
Okay. Not good. Okay. Any further discussion?
Question.
Question being called. Councillor McGinnis?
Yay.
Councillor Frazier?
Yay.
Councillor Thorburn?
Yay.
Councillor McDonald?
Yay.
Councillor Graves? Deputy Mayor Tanner?
Yay.
And I am in favor. Motion is carried. So this will come back to the May 11th meeting. Oh, look at that. We're at the end of our agenda. Thank you again to staff for your time. It's a longer meeting than normal, but really appreciate the detail on the budget and everyone sticking around. There's no further items. Kind of a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
They can move by Councillor Thorburn, seconded by?
I'll second that. Tanner.
Deputy Mayor Tanner. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye.